B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, December 17th, 2018. And holy cow, your humble host is feverishly working today to try to capture as much news as possible in about half an hour. And there are at least 15 stories that I've left on my editing table outside the studio here, and I'll hope to squeeze them in over the next few days. I'll be here this week through Thursday and then take a break and return on January the 2nd. So 2 reports have surfaced today, authorized by the Senate Intelligence Committee, one from England and one from a firm in the United States that I've never heard of before. And they conclude, after sifting through the information, some of which was limited or, shall we say, incomplete, information served up by social media operators, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, and many others. And they have an alarming conclusion that will dominate the headlines for the next 24 hours or so. Like this one in The Guardian. Russian propagandists targeted African Americans to influence 2016 U.S. election. Or the headline in the New York Times today. Russian 2016 influence operation targeted African Americans on social media. Now this appears to extend the whole Russiagate narrative, that Russia meddled in the 2016 election and they delivered it to Trump. And when you read carefully, you see a report that is wildly out of context. It serves up numbers without framing them in any rational way. It fails to identify the $82 million in dark targeted ads that Trump, his own campaign, ran on Facebook alone. But instead, we focus on the Russian troll factory in St. Petersburg that was run by Putin's chef. And it all is supposed to just jog our memories from what we've been told so far. To say, oh, yeah, Russia. Russia meddled and tipped the 2016 election to Trump. They don't mention the free media that came from the very outlets that are trumpeting this new report today. They don't talk about the billions of free TV time that was given to Trump as he freely divided the American people. And so let's go to the Guardian's report. They use a claim that exit polls indicated that black voters strongly favored Clinton over Trump, but mysteriously, turnout was reduced. Now, if you're a regular listener to this podcast and you've already caught up with our latest conversation with Greg Palast, you know that voter suppression is the number one tactic of the Republican Party to rig elections. But there's no mention of any even possibility of voter suppression related to the reduced turnout that is reported. So we get one of these reports from Oxford University and one from New Knowledge, a Texas-based American cybersecurity firm. I don't know anything about them, but I will pledge to look them up, find out how many former FBI intelligence agents they have hired, and we'll see if their reports can be deemed credible. Now, Mark Warner, the top Democrat, he will chair the committee. Oh, no, he won't. He's in the Senate. No, he will not. Adam Schiff will chair the House committee coming in January, but Mark Warner will remain the number 2, the ranking member, right? He says new laws are needed to tackle this crisis around social media, but he doesn't describe how those laws would work. And one of the bogus Facebook accounts that is cited is called Blacktivist. We're told it was created by the Russians. It attracted 4.6 million likes. It told followers in the final weeks of the campaign, no lives matter to Hillary Clinton, black people should vote for Jill Stein, or that not voting is a way to exercise our rights. Now, merely making these statements and putting them in front of people, even if people clicked like on them, does that mean people will just, like some sort of lemmings or brainwashed morons, just do what they're told to do by a post on Facebook? There's no research to indicate that in any way, shape, or form. But we're just all supposed to say, oh, wow, gosh, how many people liked? 4.6 billion people liked it? Now, keep in mind, 4.6 million people reported to have liked the Blacktivist page. Then they offer a statistic of 16 million people total were reached by more than 1,000 different advertisements aimed at African American users of Facebook. So almost 25% came from Blacktivist, but there were, all these other pages and all of these other ads. So we need a real deep dive on this and a statistical analysis, and we're not going to get that from the corporate media. They are interested in promoting the Russiagate narrative, and they have led their leaders astray in many respects, as I've been pointing out for months. So New Knowledge is quoted saying, active and ongoing interference operations remain on several platforms, but we don't get details on that. Then the New York Times, I'm shifting to their coverage here. The Russian influence campaign in 2016 was run by a St. Petersburg company, internet research agency owned by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Putin chef guy. They say both reports stress that the internet research agency created social media accounts under fake names. A major goal was to support Trump, first against his Republican rivals in the presidential race, then in the general election. Now, this is seen as, this deep interference. But Hillary Clinton pissed off Vladimir Putin. Obama doubled down on it with the sanctions that were issued related to Ukraine. And so there's a motive there for Russia to say, well, we don't want a Democrat in the White House. Does that mean that this is evidence of collusion between Trump and the Russian government? Well, no, only if you want to believe it. And we're going to get to some great analytical coverage here in just a second. So I don't doubt that these efforts were undertaken. I don't doubt that some of them succeeded in persuading, that's what I'm trying to say, some number of people. But there were more Americans determined to divide Americans, to sow mistrust in our political system, including Donald Trump, who was the lead guy doing this. And our media, the corporate media, aided and abetted. And now, Russia, Russia, Russia. Now, this actually does make sense. Renee DiResta, one of the report's authors, director of research at New Knowledge, said the Internet Research Agency leveraged pre-existing legitimate grievances wherever they could. Well, that's how you do it. Whether you're an American actor who wants to provoke a certain outcome, or you're offshore somewhere. Now, buried deep in the New York Times article is the disclaimer. Whether such efforts had a significant effect is difficult to judge. Black voter turnout declined in 2016 for the first time in 20 years in a presidential election, but it is impossible to determine whether that was the result of the Russian campaign. Not even a question about whether the suppression tactics had even a modest influence here. And I want to credit the New York Times put up a contrarian post from a reader. At the end of this article, the reader is identified as Helton in New York City. And Helton writes, even if Russia tried to influence the election, Americans still had the final say when they went to the polls. Every day people try to influence us to act or say certain things. It reminds me of my mom telling me when I was a kid, if everybody else wanted to jump off a bridge, does that mean you should do it too? And Helton concludes, stop whining already. Give Americans credit for being smart enough to make up their own minds. And then the New York Times proceeded today to publish a piece by their media columnist Jim Rutenberg, taking a look back at what the National Enquirer did. Now, this is a fair news story because the National Enquirer's owner, AMI, just entered into a cooperation agreement with the prosecutors last week. And it is fair to ask to what extent the Enquirer directly colluded with the Trump campaign to promote Trump at Hillary's expense. And I would argue that every American passes the check stand every week sometimes every day. And you see those headlines, and you know they're bullshit. Sometimes you'll even sneak a peek if the line is long and see where the bullshit came from and just how amusing it might be. But we all know that you can't trust the coverage in the National Enquirer. Still, I would submit that it had more impact than all of what Russia attempted to do, at least as far as we know to date. And interestingly, Rutenberg called up a guy who's an expert in outdoor advertising. And he said that a campaign with the level of national prominence that the Enquirer gets by being at every check stand in America every week would cost about $3 million a month if you wanted to buy that coverage. And then Rutenberg talks about the false stories about Hillary, illnesses concealed, child prostitution, bribery, treason. Yes, that was published in the National Enquirer. And get this, they have Jennifer Palmieri, who is Clinton's campaign communications director. They could have been covering all of Trump's misdeeds, but instead, not only were they not reporting on that, they were a pipeline from darknet conspiracy theories to grocery store lines. But we have to concede that in every National Enquirer story, there is a little teeny-weeny kernel of truth. And those kernels are delivered by the subjects that they tabloid trash. And so, headline, Obama and Hillary ordered FBI to spy on Trump. Well, that's an open question. Hillary, 6 months to live. Well, she fell down in broad daylight and had to be, the way they jumped her into that minivan after the 9/11 fainting, that raised questions of a lot of people. And that's the kind of thing that the Enquirer exploits. Now, I almost fell out of my chair. And let me credit, this came from a tweet from Glenn Greenwald, because I don't listen to NPR. And I don't make a big deal out of it. I'm not here to demonize NPR. I don't find their coverage compelling. It's very corporatized. It's very safe. They do not take risks, and they don't let leftists comment on the news. So I don't listen to NPR. And when Greenwald tweeted out this report that was published on December 15th under the byline of Philip Ewing, well, I posted it on Facebook and got the usual denial from Hillary bots. Let me begin by saying that the bosses at NPR put in bold type at the top of this story, this editor's note, this story has been edited to make it clear its analysis and that the allegations of the Trump campaign conspiring with the Russians remain unproven. Now, I don't know who bugged them about that, but somebody complained. And they are so concerned about challenging the Russiagate narrative that they felt compelled to add that. So, the article begins, political and legal danger for Trump may be sharpening by the day, but the case that his campaign might have conspired with the Russian attack on the 2016 election is still unproven, despite 2 years of investigations, court filings, and even numerous convictions and guilty pleas. Trump's been implicated in ordering a scheme to silence 2 women ahead of the election. That's a serious matter, or it might have been in other times, but this scheme is decidedly not a global conspiracy with a foreign power to steal the election. And just like I mentioned, that kernel of truth, well, I guess that was on my mind because this guy Philip used the same phrasing here. He publishes a tweet from Trump that's been widely ridiculed because he was trying to type smoking gun and he did smocking gun. But that aside, he wrote, Democrats can't find a smoking gun tying the Trump campaign to Russia after Comey's testimony. No smocking gun, no collusion. He misspelled smoking twice. That's because there was no collusion. So now the Dems go to a simple private transaction, wrongly called a campaign, blah, blah, blah. So what NPR's journalist writes here is, there's an important kernel of truth in that argument. Not only is there no smoking gun, but the Russia case also appears to have been weakening, not strengthening, while America's eyes have been on the hush money payments. And he goes through a list of items here. He says, item, Cohen ostensibly played a key role in the version of events told by the infamous, partly unverified Russia dossier. But the new story didn't include the trip to Prague that's widely been discussed and appears in the dossier, nor did Cohen discuss that in his interview Friday on ABC News. Could the trip or a trip still be substantiated? Yes. But would a man go to prison for 3 years without addressing that? Second item, Trump's former campaign chairman, Manafort, is on track to be sentenced early next year. But the crimes for which the feds want Manafort to be locked up aren't a Russian conspiracy to throw the election. And moreover, Manafort was there at the Veselnitskaya meeting, June 2016 at Trump Tower. But his role in that meeting hasn't figured into either of his federal cases, nor been the subject of court documents. Maybe the feds are holding all that back for some kind of big reveal, or maybe there's no conspiracy here. And then he asks, if Manafort isn't in legal jeopardy over his role in the Trump Tower meeting, does that mean no one else is either? Like Don Jr.? Then on Mike Flynn, he says, he's been a very good witness, the feds say. But does that sound like the kind of attitude they would take with someone who's been serving as a Russian factotum in the White House? Will the feds ever charge Carter Page? And so this is a good, honest, I think very objective analysis. And Philip Ewing closes by saying, from what is visible today, the case is still Swiss cheese. Unless that changes in a big way, the hottest political story in a generation may lose its place on center stage. Then there's Aaron Mate, who's guested on this podcast twice in the past year. He continues to write for The Nation, where his latest says, don't let Russophobia warp the facts on Russiagate. And similar to Ewing at NPR, he says, over the course of the Russia investigation, the procession of key associates flipping on Trump has raised expectations that Mueller would turn up proof of collusion. And he recaps some of the recent activity and reporting from James Risen at The Intercept, who says this is potentially devastating new information about Trump's ties to Moscow. And he quotes a New Yorker article as well. But then Mate says the truth. Mueller has not issued any charges, provided any evidence, or made any collusion allegations. If there does exist a case, Mueller hasn't revealed it yet. For all the excitement, Cohen, Manafort, and Flynn do not bring us any closer to the long-sought Trump-Russia conspiracy. He continues, all but 2 months of Cohen's prison term are for corruption crimes unrelated to the Russia probe. And he goes on to say, the only Kremlin assistance that we know of comes in a January 2016 phone call between Cohen and a Kremlin assistant. The aide informed Cohen that Putin doesn't build houses, and if Trump wants to invest in Russia, come on over to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, which was scheduled for a few months later. And that's the only Russia-related criminal activity that is cited in Cohen's lies to Congress related to the effort to build a Trump Tower, a failure that never got beyond a letter of intent. Also, what's noteworthy about Cohen's perjury is the congressional testimony that Mueller does not allege to be false. Mueller doesn't claim that Cohen lied to Congress when he told him in September of 17, I never saw anything, not a hint of anything that demonstrated Trump's involvement in Russian interference in our election or any form of Russian collusion. Then there's the Prague question that is not addressed. And Mueller kind of fuzzily says that Cohen gave useful information concerning certain discrete Russia-related matters, core to the Russia probe. But we really don't know what that means. Then he turns to Manafort. The Mueller filing identifies the former Trump campaign manager, his alleged crimes and lies. The document is heavily redacted, so a full picture is not available. But everything that Mueller does make public is devoid of collusion in bringing Manafort's case to date. The only mention of a Russian in Mueller's new filing comes in the accusation that Manafort lied about his contacts with Konstantin Kilimnik. Mueller has previously asserted that Kilimnik has ties to Russian intelligence that were active during 2016. But to date, Mueller has only identified Kilimnik as material to cases related to Manafort's Ukraine lobbying work. And it's important, and Mattei is doing this again, to underscore that Manafort, when he was working for Yanukovych in Ukraine, was pushing Yanukovych toward the U.S. and Europe, not toward Russia. And this has been widely misreported in the American media. It really shifts the motive that Manafort would have. He was just profiteering. And he was a man with no real personal center or core. So this is a brilliant piece by Aaron Mattei. He breaks down a lot of the issues, and he closes by taking on Maria Butina. And I have to say that it causes me to rethink some of my recent comments about Butina. He writes, since her arrest, Butina has been portrayed as a Russian spy, possibly even a covert criminal linked to Trump, the Republican Party, and the NRA. It turns out that none of this is the case. Butina agreed after 5 months in solitary to plead guilty to one count of conspiring to act as an unregistered foreign agent. As her plea document details, she openly tried to make political connections to members of the GOP and NRA in public. And she did so at the behest of Alexander Torshin, who recently served as deputy of the Central Bank of Russia. But prosecutors retracted their earlier claim. They acknowledged that Butina was a genuine student at American University. They have abandoned contentions that she worked with Russian intelligence agencies and that she was only using her boyfriend to meet other influential Americans. And he concludes here, Aaron Mattei, comparing the actual facts in the Trump-Russia investigation to how they're being recklessly portrayed. It seems Butina is not the only case where a Cold War lens is warping our view. Well said, Aaron Mattei. I've also linked in the show file for today's podcast to what I would freely acknowledge is a much more speculative account. This comes from Gordon Duff. He publishes at Veterans Today, and I have interviewed him at least once. It may have been twice. And I found him to be fascinating, but very hard to pin down. Duff is a former spy. I can't remember if he worked for the CIA or another agency. But in his highly speculative piece, and I want you to be skeptical, but he argues that the real money trail that led to Russia has now branched out. It goes to Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. This is his interpretation of mainstream media accounts. He says many of those investigated as Russians, always listed as close to Putin, are actually more closely tied to Trump supporters Semyon Mogilevich and Felix Sater, listed as Russian crime bosses who are both Israeli citizens with long histories of working for the Mossad. Mogilevich, who works the fake Russian pro-Trump network, says Duff, on behalf of Israel, has been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list since 2009 for murder, extortion, prostitution, drug and weapons trafficking. And Felix Sater, who has ties to Trump, and we've talked about him before, he controls Bayrock Group. He is a partner in Trump Soho, and this is news to me. Well, first of all, I knew he was an FBI informant. What's news is that he was named Jewish Man of the Year in 2010 and 2014. Wow, I didn't know about that. So I encourage you to read it, file it away as unproven but interesting speculation, and you might find it interesting down the line if Gordon Duff is proven to be accurate on any of these points. A couple more on this story. Yasha Levine, our friend who has published the book Silicon Surveillance Valley, thank you, he published a piece, a front page from the New York Times, February 13, 1919, just short of 100 years ago. The headline reads, Red Agitators from This City, Potent in Russia. Subhead, Former East Siders largely responsible for Bolshevism, says Dr. Simons. And the story reads, the Senate committee, which is investigating Bolshevism, was told today that present chaotic conditions in Russia were due in large part to agitators from the east side of New York City. Oh, yeah. Russian influence in America. Been around for a long time. Hey, here's an interesting, fun little challenge for you. Use your phone or computer, whatever device you like. Log on to google.com and enter Hillary Clinton, and then notice how autocomplete responds when you start to type the word email. All right? Now, at Google, if you enter Donald Trump EM, it will suggest Donald Trump email. If you enter Joe Biden EM, it'll suggest Joe Biden email. If you do Bill Clinton EM, you'll get Bill Clinton email address. Barack Obama EM, Barack Obama email. You get it. But if you enter Hillary Clinton E, the first suggestion is emoji, and the second is education. When you type M, you still don't get email. And in fact, I was able to type in the whole string Hillary Clinton email investigation, and I didn't get any suggestions from Google's autocomplete. I can't explain it, but there it is. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And here in the holiday season, people get generous and I get grateful. I want to thank Andrew Harnack. Cynthia Clark just renewed her annual subscription. Susan Lundgren kicks in $10 every month, and Peter J. Hoffmeister is a $5 a month guy. I invite you to join them, and if you want to be extra generous here at the holidays, I will be extra grateful. All you got to do is visit peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu tab, then click on Become a Subscriber. It lands you on the sign-up page, and I think you know what to do from there. If you prefer to use the U.S. mail, my address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. And typically, I'm about midway through the podcast when I do that little plug. I realize I'm already at 25 minutes, and I have about 9 more stories. I'll do what I can here. On Friday, Robert Mueller filed documents pushing back on Mike Flynn's suggestion that he was entrapped by the FBI agents who caught him lying. And I consider this to be St. Bob Mueller protecting the ass of St. James Comey. And I still believe you can make a credible case that Mike Flynn was entrapped. Now, Mueller goes to great lengths to say that the FBI agents, including Peter Strzok, who were sent by James Comey and by the number 2, Andy McCabe, that they tried repeatedly to help Flynn out, to jog his memory, but the defendant never corrected his false statements. Strzok said that Flynn was bright but not profoundly sophisticated, and that he basically was just committed to the lies by that point and wasn't willing to change his story. So I think that there are 2 sides to every story, and maybe Mueller is correct. But I still see a plausible scenario where Mike Flynn was set up. But one question that has plagued me is why Mueller didn't ask for additional prison time for Flynn related to his illegal lobbying and unreported lobbying for Turkey. But 2 of his associates, his co-conspirators, were indicted today as part of the investigation into Turkey's lobbying campaign trying to get Fethullah Gulen extradited from Pennsylvania. The 2 former colleagues, Bijan Kian and Akim Alptekin. Alptekin is a moneybags guy who used a Dutch subsidiary he owned to funnel the money to Flynn, even though it originated with the Turkish government. So I believe, and always have, that this is a much more serious case than whether Flynn lied about his phone call with the Russian ambassador. And Flynn and Kian commissioned a lengthy dossier called Fethullah Gulen, a primer for investigators. If anybody can get a copy of that, would you please leak it to Peter at peterbcollins.com? I'd love to see a copy of it. So we'll wait to see how this plays out, and it's possible that Flynn will be charged later. But that's highly unusual in the processes of our government investigations and prosecutions. And by the way, BuzzFeed says that at the Buenos Aires summit that Trump talked to Erdogan of Turkey, and Erdogan asked for the scalp of Fethullah Gulen, and Trump said, "We're working on that." Not the scalp, actually, but the extradition. Now, we were shocked on Saturday to learn that a hand-picked judge in Texas, a federal judge, is striking down not just part, but all of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, claiming that once you remove the pre-existing requirement and the mandatory participation, that everything else falls apart and therefore it's unconstitutional. Now, I believe there's a severability clause in the Affordable Care Act that says, if one thing is found to be illegal or unconstitutional, the rest of it still stands. But that's not the position this judge took. And while I see this as an opportunity to expand Medicare, even declare Medicare for all, the votes aren't there in the Senate, and this is going to be a mess. A lot of people stand to lose coverage. It will create chaos in the marketplace. Insurance rates are going to go up more. And we have these Democrats who are not willing to lead. Chuck Schumer's afraid to promote Medicare for all, and Nancy Pelosi will say, well, let's expand Medicare to people age 50. Well, I'll accept that as an incremental step. But the real solution to our health care crisis in this country is as simple as Medicare for all. And it's simply unachievable on so many levels. Well, change of the guard in Washington. Ryan Zinke, who rode in as Interior Secretary on a horse, is leaving on a horse's ass. He's been implicated in scandals in Montana and problems while he was Secretary of the Interior. Trump's tired of it. He's heaving him overboard, and he had to be pushed. Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, is going to return to counting his money and fleecing bankrupt companies. And we're hearing that both Betsy DeVos at Education and Kirstjen Nielsen at Homeland Security are expected to be on the way out. I don't know about Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I've seen farewells to her, but I haven't heard that she has officially resigned. And then there's the case of Matt Whitaker, the interim attorney general, playing goalie over there at the Justice Department. What surprises does he have for us between now and, say, January 2nd? I think these holidays will not be slow news days. In Poland, at the climate change confab, they declared progress, but it's not true. The U.S., Russia, and the Saudis undermined the talks every way they could, and the ball has been punted down the field once again. Most of the environmentalists expressed disappointment in what they saw as half measures to deal with a mounting crisis as greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. Trump has said that he has ended the war on Christmas and we're all now free to say Merry Christmas and just ignore the feelings of people who aren't Christians. But I predict he'll tell federal employees Happy Holidays as he and Stephen Miller press for a government shutdown in exchange for the wall. And it doesn't look like that wall is going to be funded by Mexico or by the U.S. Congress anytime soon. And it'll be a brinksmanship battle through the end of this week. Finally, today, I got that email I was expecting from St. Xavier High School. That's where I went, a Jesuit school in Cincinnati. Got a great education, and I have no bones about that. But the email they sent identified priests who had served at our high school, who have been credibly implicated in sexual abuse claims. And this is part of a pattern across the country. Not just the Jesuits, but individual dioceses across the country are releasing lists of the priests accused of sexual abuse. But it's incomplete. In Syracuse, one of the people who founded SNAP, the group that represents the victims, said that he had already received calls from victims who said their abusers were not on the list that was released, and that the name of the priest who had raped Mr. Bailey was listed in a section for clergy who were deceased at the time the reporting of the allegation. So they're attempting, I do take the Catholic bishops as sincere, they're attempting to finally come clean after decades of cover-up criminal abuse and the kind of hypocrisy that Jesus talked about, as evidenced by the Pharisees. And so I learned today that my high school principal, Father Don Nastold, is one of those people on the list. And Alan Kirk, a former Catholic priest who taught me at St. X in 1969, he never touched me or, had displayed any inappropriate behavior. but someone else was victimized by him. The Catholic bishops, the church as an entity, and the bosses in Rome have shamed the message of Jesus Christ. And that's why I'm no longer a Catholic. And I'm sorry to lay that out to you here at Christmas time. I don't know why they chose Christmas time to release the list. But I hope it will finally heal, if that's possible. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.